right, so let's take a look at how World War One got started. The United States is not going to join this conflict until pretty close to its completion, but thought that we needed to get a better understanding of what was going on during this period of time and where the conflict comes from if the United States is going to get involved. The aftermath of World War One has an awful lot to do with the start of World War II as well, and the United States is going to be much more involved in that conflict. Got some pictures here for you at the beginning. One of the things that is a hallmark of World War I fighting is trench warfare. I'm going to put some clips up on the playlist of movies like 1917, which just came out last year, War Horse, movies like that do a nice job of illustrating what life was like in these trenches. Basically, with the birth of machine guns, it didn't make sense anymore to march out in those lines like you had in some of those early American wars we studied. And so it's going to cause people to have to go underground to avoid those bullets. Problem is, it's going to severely slow down the fighting as well, and we'll see how that plays out in what we're looking at too. Got an example of some artillery there at the top. Definitely have some interesting looks with missiles and bombs in this war. And then this war also sees the first use of the tank in widespread warfare. And so we're going to see how that plays a part as well. To start the story, though, we've got to back up all the way to the 1800s and the rule of this lady. Her name was Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria is a long-ruling monarch of England, right? She is so influential that there is an entire age named after her. The Victorian age, there's Victorian literature, Victorian furniture. She just had a huge effect on her day, and that effect is going to extend into World War I. Even though she has passed away by the time World War I has started, one of the things that she did was that in order to secure alliances around Europe, she took her 9 children and her 46 grandchildren and married them into the royal families of other countries. The idea being that if these people are married, there are family ties that will help stave off any kind of conflict between these groups. It doesn't really work out that way, but it does make it very interesting because an awful lot of the people who are going to be leading these countries in World War I and fighting against each other are in fact cousins. So got 3 big leaders here that you'll see. Kaiser Wilhelm is the leader of Germany at the time. Tsar Nicholas II marries one of the princesses of England and becomes, joins the family that way. And then, of course, King George V is in the line of succession to Queen Victoria. And so the 3 leaders of these big countries are all related either by blood or by marriage. And so this idea, and I think probably if you thought about it, maybe in Queen Victoria's mind, this was going to keep something like this from happening, but it really doesn't. Things are going to devolve very quickly, but an awful lot of the folks that are running Europe at this time can trace their roots back to Queen Victoria. What starts to happen in pre-World War I Europe is there's a military buildup in most countries. Countries knew that having a military was a source of pride for their countries. It was also a form of power. And so they spent a lot of money and resources into having large armies, building new weapons, and being prepared for all kinds of conflict. Well, what that's going to force people to do is start to take sides. And so we start to see alliances that are formed before World War I. Germany, if you look at the German Empire there, one of the activities you're going to do is a map activity where we look at these countries before World War I and then after, right? If you know your European geography, Germany's not nearly that big today, and we'll talk about what happens there. But Germany felt like they were trapped. They're landlocked between Russia to the east and France and Great Britain to the west. And so they felt like that was a threat to them. You're going to see that's the way it plays out in the early part of World War I. And so they form a defensive alliance with Austria-Hungary. Now, again, those are a couple of different countries today. There are several countries going to be made out of there. And then the country of Italy. Basically, that defensive alliance said, hey, if we get attacked by Russia, France, or Great Britain, we will come to each other's aid. Russia, France, and Great Britain are going to make the same kind of deal. If they are attacked by Germany, Austria-Hungary, or Italy, then they will join in the conflict with the person that got attacked. Now, as you look at the map, though, you'll see there are countries that aren't in one of these alliances. And I want to draw your attention to one that is at the northern part of France. It's the country of Belgium. And Belgium is really where the story of World War I is going to get started. You can see that Germany and France share a border. That border, though, France had spent a lot of time and money building up defenses along that border. And so when Germany's looking to attack France, as they do at the beginning of World War I, they don't want to attack there. It's very heavily fortified. They don't know that that's going to work out very well for them. And so the idea is they are going to speed through the neutral country of Belgium in order to get to France. The problem is when Germany invades Belgium, they are violating a treaty, and it will draw Britain and France into conflict with Germany. Germany is counting on the idea that Britain will either not come to help in Belgium or will do so very slowly. That is not the case. Britain is a little slow to give France all the help that she thinks she needs, but the British military does show up very quickly, and we start to see the early parts of World War I getting started. So when Germany invades Belgium, they are then being aided by Austria-Hungary and Italy. Russia, France, and Great Britain will join in. And so these defensive alliances are going to be activated pretty quickly. The event that's going to start all of this conflict is the assassination of one man. His name is Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and he is the crown prince of Austria-Hungary. Which basically meant he was the next guy in line for the throne. These are some images. You can see a real picture of him at the top, and then an autopsy picture at the bottom, then a dramatic recreation of his assassination in the picture that you see on the left. Archduke Ferdinand had gone to, let me pull that map back up, right? If you look right below Austria-Hungary, there's the country of Serbia. And Austria-Hungary had annexed Serbia, which basically meant they wanted to make them part of their country. Of course, the Serbian people don't appreciate that. Well, when the Crown Prince goes to Serbia in order to visit, a terrorist group will assassinate him. They shoot both him and his wife. And you may look and think, well, how in the world is one guy dying going to make that much of a difference? Well, here's the problem, right? Austria-Hungary, once Franz Ferdinand is killed, declares war on Serbia. Serbia has a defensive alliance with Russia, and so Russia has to come into the conflict. They declare war on Austria-Hungary. Because they do, Germany will declare war on Russia. When Germany declares war on Russia, France and Great Britain declare war on Germany to come to their aid. And so Franz Ferdinand is assassinated late June, early July, and by August, the entire world, or at least the entire European world, is at war. And it's all because of these defensive alliances, but it all kind of starts with the death of this one man. What is going to happen is we've got a European society in all these countries where the military is romanticized. They've heard stories of people like Napoleon and Frederick the Great, and they're longing for empire, they're longing for military glory. And so for an awful lot of these guys, this is the opportunity of a lifetime. This is going to be their chance to prove themselves. Probably the biggest thing that goes wrong, though, is they all make a bad assumption that they know what the other people are going to do. Right? Germany knew when they invaded Belgium that Britain wasn't going to come in. Problem was, Britain was going to come in. France knew that Germany wasn't going to invade in the way that they thought they were going to invade. And so France had actually planned to be very aggressive if Germany had started action, but didn't understand what tactics they were going to use. And so everybody's kind of thinking they can anticipate the other guys, and that's really not the case. It's not going to work out very well for anybody involved. Got some different views here for you of some different soldiers from countries. Now, if you remember looking at some things we've talked about in the early American wars, the uniforms were very bright. The French are wearing blue uniforms. The British, very famously, red uniforms. Very decked out. A lot of shiny buttons and gold. Doesn't take them very long to figure out when World War I starts. All that makes you is a target. If you're out in a brand spanking new red uniform on a battlefield, you're just easy to spot. And so we see a change that's going to be made in a lot of these uniforms. They're going to go with earth tones, grays and browns, in order to try and blend in with the landscape. When you're looking at things, you see the German soldier there on the left with the pointy spike on his helmet. It's usually a pretty good way to tell a German in World War I. But the Russians who are coming in, Russia in this instance is going to have a lot of people. They're not going to have a lot of resources or weapons. And so there are going to be an awful lot of Russian soldiers on the battlefield, but they're very ill supplied. Britain and France, like I said, are going to be coming from the other side of things, both very confident in their militaries, but again, making some assumptions they probably just shouldn't have made. Some new instruments of war that we're going to see. We now have artillery that can shoot over the horizon. And basically what that means is you can shoot and hit something that you can't see. And so that's going to be a different tactic that people are going to use. Artillery, some of the fortresses, for instance, that Belgium thought were going to protect them. When Germany rolls out some of these huge artillery cannons that they've got, they completely devastate these fortresses, and it was something that the Belgians weren't prepared for. I already talked about machine guns and the part that they're going to play in the war. Machine guns are going to force these guys into trenches, and then what we're going to see is that trench warfare is going to lead to the use of poison gas. Both sides are going to use different things: mustard gas, chlorine gas. The idea being, when that gas would go over to the other side's trenches, it would drop down into the trenches because it was heavier than the air, and then choke the people that were in there. Gas masks were widely distributed and were an important part then of every soldier's kind of kit, be a life-saving tool that they had. What would happen is trenches would be set up on either side. So they do this about 30 miles outside of Paris. You see the Battle of the Marne that's going to happen. And there are guys that are there for 3 years fighting over a piece of land the size of a football field. Because both sides would be in their trenches. One side would send people over the top, as the British called it. So you got out of your trench, went running at the other trench. In between, there's something called no man's land. There's barbed wire, things like that are there to keep you from getting too close. Eventually, you'd retreat, go back to your trench, and then the other side would attack, probably because they were mad you'd attack them. I'm going to put another clip up there for you of what I thought was one of the coolest parts of the first Wonder Woman movie. It's set during World War I, and she actually engages in a little bit of trench warfare herself, of course fictionally, in that film. So I'll put that up on the playlist for you as well. The biggest innovation, and one that we're going to see pay huge dividends when it comes to World War II, is the use of airplanes. Now, airplanes weren't very old by the time World War I got started. And early on in the war, they were used mostly for observation. Eventually, they'll have weapons put on them. We have a flying ace in World War I, Eddie Rickenbacker. Probably the most famous flying ace is the Red Baron from Germany during this time. But we really see airplanes becoming more important in warfare, just to kind of see the trenches, drop things on battlefields, but also dogfighting up in the air. Planes at this time wouldn't have gone faster than modern cars. And so there would be these clouds of planes often above battlefields that are really going to make it different in the way that you want to tactically fight a war. And so the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand is going to set off this conflict. All of these different countries are going to be drawn in by these defensive agreements they've gotten. So the death of this one guy by August is going to have the entire world at war, or at least the European world. As the United States, we're going to sit out for right now. We're going to talk about how we get involved next time. But in the beginning, after kind of a rush of activity in August of Germany coming through Belgium and invading France, they're eventually stopped, and then you get into this stalemate of trench warfare. And for an awful long time, that's the way things are going to be set. And so, like I said, we'll see how the U.S. gets involved next time.